Welcome to Simplify. I'm Caitlin Schiller.
I'm Ben Schumann-Solar. We're back.
We're back, but we are back and new and improved?
We're new and older.
We're both newer and older, yes. And we're in a new location.
We're in a new location. I built this audio studio for my business, Colo Media.
Yeah.
So we're in the brand new Colo Media audio studios in Moabit in Berlin.
Yes. Berlin, Germany, by the way, for anybody wondering about that.
Not Berlin, Pennsylvania.
No. Or Berlin, Connecticut.
Whatever.
Yeah. And we're here at Colo because we are now independent.
That's right. We no longer work at Blinkist, Caitlin nor I, which means Simplify is now an independent podcast show, author interview experience. But We're not going to change too much. Just because we're independent now, it means obviously we don't have to recommend Blinkist products unless we really want to. But things are going to be the same, right? I mean, we make this because we think it's a good thing in the world and because people like it and people have been writing you and saying when you come back.
Yes. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
We missed you too.
So what can people expect?
They can expect the same kinds of author interview podcasts we've always had. You can expect great new insights. You can expect some really cool guests. I think you can also expect an even broader range of topics than we've treated in the past, which is just, as far as I'm concerned, it's only better. I mean, when has been a better time in the world to have more kinds of good information from smart people?
Yeah. And we're also going to, we used to release in seasons.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to try and release every 2 weeks now.
Yes, that's
forever.
the goal. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so you can always check in and there should be new content and new episodes. We will also have a newsletter, which we will put a link to in the show notes and which we'll put up around various channels. If you want to keep an eye on what we're doing, if you want to help support us, sign up to the newsletter. We'll be writing, we'll be adding some transcripts. We'll make like a whole beautiful content ecosystem out of the really cool stuff that we have in these episodes.
Yeah, that we hope you enjoy.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, there's other stuff that we can do throughout the year, right? Like we might have more events, live events. We might have some stuff in the bookshop, Chapters Bookshop here in Berlin, where the studio is. We might have swag.
Oh, my goodness.
Who knows?
Yes, because I don't know if you noticed, but we have a beautiful new look.
True. We have a new brand.
Shout out to Christoph Rausche, my friend who did this beautiful new look.
Yeah. But let's get into the episode. I think people know the format and we don't have to do too much else. We just want to tell people now we're on our own.
And really, really happy to be back.
Yeah. So introduce us to Elinor Cleghorn.
Yes.
What should people know before we listen to your conversation?
Yeah. All right. So Elinor Cleghorn is an academic. Her specialty is the history of women's health. And just women's medical stuff, which I guess is women's health. The book that we will be discussing today is called Unwell Women, Misdiagnosis and Myth in a Man-Made World. She has a new book out too, which you should check out. But this book was the one that was recommended to me, which is why I wanted to have Elinor on the show. I heard about her on the recommendation of a friend, as I said. And this friend explained the premise that it was about the female body, its uses and its abuses by and for science across history, and all the myths that surround it. And I knew I had to read the book. So I picked it up. I think I was like 20 pages in when I emailed Elinor and asked her to be on Simplify because I felt like what she was doing in this book, a completely new exploration of what women's health even means, was really important and really important right now. So yeah, I thought that her topic was historical, but contemporary and urgent, and so beautifully researched and made me feel closer to my own body and my own history as a woman. How did you feel hearing this conversation, Ben?
I mean, we'll talk about it a lot in the bookend after the interview, but I do think it changes the way you think about medicine and care, and this word unwell. Yeah, it'll change it definitely affects the way I think about the medical system, also with some stuff going on in my private life that we can talk about in the bookend also. But but what's one thing you want people to pay attention to or like look out for in the interview?
I think, and this will come up in more Simplify episodes that we'll be introducing to you, but the idea that myths have incredible sticking power and they often present themselves as biases and often at an unconscious level. So these myths are really important. I think that that's the very simple thing I'd say listen up for.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, let's get right into it. Here's you and Elinor Cleghorn.
Hi, Elinor. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Caitlin. It's lovely to be here.
Elinor, before we get started, I would love for you to introduce yourself the way that you like to be introduced.
Okay, so my name is Elinor Cleghorn, and I have a PhD in humanities and cultural studies. So I'm a doctor of philosophy, not a doctor of medicine.
Yes.
I am now a writer, and I specialize in women's health and the histories of women's health. And I'm the author of a book called Unwell Women that was first published in the US and the UK in 2021. And that is me. And at the moment, I'm working on another book, A Long History of Motherhood.
Amazing. I'm glad you mentioned the new book too. But today we're going to focus on Unwell Women, which has the full title, A Journey Through Medicine and Myth in a Man-Made World. I have to say, I was just bowled over by how much research you must need to have done in order to create this book, just how much primary source research. You wrote this book in 2021 and it covers this huge swath of history, starting from the time of Hippocrates up through the Middle Ages, through the Enlightenment, into post-war periods and the civil rights movement in the US. And there are actual accounts of, insofar as you're able, of what these women went through in every single time period in this book. How was that for you? What was it like finding these primary documents?
I had some constraints because there is so much material. My constraint being that as far as possible, I wanted to tell this history through the experiences of women who are unwell. And often we only meet these women through a case study, say, a 19th century physician's notes that appear in a paper or appear in a medical journal at the time. So often these women appear very fragmented. They appear as a collection of symptoms. They appear as an age, maybe some sort of observations that feel very unethical now about their character or their marital status. So they emerge, into history in a way that's very partial, very fragmented. And it always felt to me really important to remember that when we're looking at history, like the history of medicine, yes, that knowledge has been written down and created by doctors, physicians, healthcare professionals who've been in the position to be able to write down and publish their knowledge. But the reason that knowledge was produced is because human people have suffered, and their bodies, their experiences, their emotions, what they have been through as human people suffering from diseases of the mind and of the body has been the source of that knowledge.
I kept thinking about that adage that, history is written by the winners. Mm-hmm. And usually, of course, people are talking about war victors when they say this. But winners of another sort are people who are winners of the social status wars, and the people just in power in general. And it's so clear to me in this book that you were trying to make sure the people who didn't have the kind of social and economic power necessarily to transmit their stories, that their stories, insofar as you were able, got told.
It's such a great point that, history is for the victors, for the winners. I feel like identifying as I do as a feminist cultural historian is always because my primary concern is to read the histories of women through a feminist lens, but also because it's honoring the work of feminists in the second wave. So feminist academics, feminist historians in the 60s and 70s who were really making it possible for us to think about how the lives of ordinary women are the stuff of history. It was so important, the work that those historians did in that swathe of academic feminism did to show us that there are these other kind of histories, what we might call the, history at the margins or minor histories.
I just kept thinking, and I suppose this is the point of history and making sure history is transmitted to people today, but how incredibly relevant all of this research that you did is to right now, because so much has changed. And yet the attitudes that underpin our culture and our policies, they have not changed all that much. Women's bodies are still treated as these unfathomable mysteries, dangers, or objects, and women's pain is still diminished. And we're seeing that women's sexuality and reproductive freedoms are beginning to be tempered in a way that looks a lot like it used to in the bad old days. And we're seeing pronatalist movements picking up across the Western world and freedoms being revoked, like Roe versus Wade being overturned. So this book feels more current and urgent to me than I imagined it would when I picked it up. What are you thinking about as you start to see these patterns sharpen up in the news today and in what you see happening around you?
I mean, it's extraordinary to think how close some of the language and rhetoric used by right-wing actors in our politics and culture at the moment, how close some of their rhetoric is to historical stuff. There are just the way that attitudes towards women's bodies, especially towards what women's bodies are for. They are for reproducing. Women's bodies are for replenishing the state according to the designs of those people who happen to be in power. And these are attitudes, myths that we have seen a rise and fall throughout history. The very beginnings of where Alma Women begins in ancient Greece. It begins with the sort of start of what we might call Western medicine, with the Hippocratic authors from whom we get our Hippocratic oath, that medical professionals swear a version of. And then the idea then that women existed in order to replenish the population, to furnish society with more soldiers, more mothers, with more bodies, in order to sort of increase the civilization, to move toward progress. And we see that again now. And it's always shocking to me how close some of this rhetoric is. And it just makes me think these people have historians working in their research teams. They must do. Because there are things that are said that appear literally torn from, the playbooks of like the American Revolution, from the early days of the founding fathers, from ancient Greece. And it is really startling that women are still having to fight this continual battle to call their bodies their own. And when I say that, I mean the right to ownership over their own bodies, the right to decide what to do with their bodies, but also the right to be listened to and heard when they talk about what's happened to their bodies, how their bodies feel, and also to choose, how to experience pleasure, how to have sex, how to find joy with their body. These are all aspects of womanhood that have been policed, fought over, used as political capital for centuries. And the bit of kind of hope I get in that is that we've seen this happen before, and there is always resistance. There is resistance, and there is fight, and there is work and collectivity and community that has resisted these sort of systems of power and their attempts on our autonomy and our agency when it comes to our bodily lives.
That is hopeful. That is a nice note to end that reflection on.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't be also, of course, extremely alarmed. Despair is such a valid and appropriate emotion to what we're seeing happen, but in its forms, the way that history repeats itself in a negative way, we learn from history in terms of how communities have organized, supported each other, created, systems of mutual aid and mutual support that always give me that little glimmer of hope when I feel despairing about, the sort of ever encroaching rise of another form of patriarchy.
Yeah. Speaking of patriarchy, I was telling my partner the other night about the book I was reading for today, and he said, it sounds like male doctors' health recommendations were kind of tuned toward getting men more of what they wanted, sex and heirs. And I was like, yes, that's exactly it. It does sound like that, doesn't it?
Well, I think ding, 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 completely true. I think when we look at the sort of arc of medical history that I journey through in this book, I very much take the standpoint that male physicians from the beginning of medicine's history were agents for patriarchal societal ambitions. And that means in a patriarchal society, as we know, that men's needs, men's desires, men's expectations are prioritized. And, it's no coincidence that medicine, being a historically male dominated field of knowledge and practice until like the 19th century, would prioritize not necessarily male needs, but the overarching needs of a patriarchal society, in which women exist to serve male ideals. And certainly in ancient Greece, the ideas put forward by the Hippocratic authors about women's diseases and disorders were completely focused on how better to tune the female body to make it able to serve the needs of men. And your partner's completely right. Those needs were sex and heirs.
Mm-hmm.
And if we give the ancient Greeks a little bit of leeway for a minute and we say, okay, we have a society that's incredibly divided along gender lines, a society in which there are very specific ideas about what male bodies and female bodies are for. And ensuring the longevity and continuation of their society was especially important. And they also had little more to go on when understanding disease and illness, other than social norms, cultural ideas, because these doctors were not cutting bodies open and performing autopsies. They were not able to put someone under an ultrasound scan. They didn't have the benefit of blood tests. We're talking about a medicine that is constructed around social and cultural ideas of who men and women are and what they should do. So if we can give them a tiny bit of leeway in that they had little else to go on. That said,
very generous of you, yes.
Yeah, their ideas, because they emerged during this, fundamental part of the construction of Western civilization, Western knowledge, Western thought, their ideas have become kind of written into the bedrock of history as extremely authoritative and the sort of foundations from which other forms of medical knowledge kind of spiraled out. So even though, thankfully, doctors today are not saying, as some of the ancient Greek doctors did, that if women are not pregnant or having marital sex, then their uteruses get, lazy and mischievous and dry and start wandering around the body in search of moisture. These integral foundational myths about women's bodies and how they work have enormous cultural sticking power, and they form the basis from which other knowledge is created. So it's like when you layer this sort of new learning on top of old, these fundamental ideas that are not just, these are the masters of medicine, but also these are effective ideas in terms of how you use medicine as one of the systems of patriarchal power.
Yeah.
So they stick, they continue, they're transmitted, this knowledge is transmitted across the centuries, reinterpreted in light of new understanding and new discovery, but it's still there. These sort of shadowy ideas still very much haunt the medium.
You said we can give them a little bit of leeway because they had these set ideas of what women and men were for. So women are for procreation, right? What did the ancient Greeks think men were for? I have no idea what men thought men were for.
Men were for fighting, men were for thinking, men were for working, men were for farming. I think, I mean, to put it in the sort of bluntest and kind of crassest way possible, were for doing the outside work and women were for doing the inside work. And men are also for continuing their patrilineal line, right? Men are also for making sure that they get a woman pregnant who will give birth to their legitimate heir, not just any baby, but the one that's actually theirs, so that they can continue this line and pass on their farms and their homes and their wealth to their sons and sons and sons. So yeah, they're there for maintaining, the sort of scaffold of patriarchal society, which is the continuation of the rule of the fathers and sons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, makes sense. Well, now that we have that straight, we can we can get back to talking about women more. And it strikes me that there's no way to talk about the history of women's health without talking about pain. The story that is coming to mind now is when this physician named Meigs was saying that labor pain was the most desirable, salutary, and conservative manifestation of life force. When you think about women's health and women's medical lineage and pain, what stories come to mind?
I think that's a brilliant example of how the this kind of all-encompassing idea that I think we still battle with today, that women's pain is something that is inevitable, something that is a condition of existing in a female body, right? That we bear pain, we are built to bear pain. And so our pain is not seen as a medical issue in the way that male pain is seen as a medical issue. From the myth of Adam and Eve in the Bible, when God says to Eve, because she wants to eat from the tree of knowledge, he says, look, because you've wanted to know a little bit of stuff about how all this works, I'm going to punish all women. And what he does is he says, I'm going to punish you women by making you have sorrow in childbearing and pain in conception, and I'm going to make you all submissive to husbands. So that is that's the fundamental, Western Christian myth about women are granted this, God granted their pain, and it's something they have to bear. And even if we don't, follow or think, well, the reason my pain was just dismissed at the doctor's office was because of Adam and Eve. It's not that simple. But again, it's one of those accepted ideas that has kind of finagled its way into our broader secular cultural understanding of women, of pain, and of how women's pain, should the sort of worth of it, right? Whether women deserve to go through it or not is also a really important question. That particular physician, Meigs, who's writing about labor pain, Charles Meigs, the idea that women's pain in giving birth made them better mothers, that love came through suffering. Again, I think a very Christian idea
Yes.
we hear this kind of rhetoric now. I mean, it was only in sort of 2017 that I remember obstetrician, a famous male obstetrician in the UK, talking about how women's labor pain was useful, that it primed them for becoming a mother, and spouting sort of ill thought of research, and I put quote marks around that suggests that experiencing pain primes the maternal bonding areas of the brain. So
Wow.
even though we might not be citing, Adam and Eve and biblical myths in the labor room, it's so ingrained into our culture understanding that women suffer pain and that's part of what makes them women. Was that how do we unpick these myths that serve a certain organization of society so well?
Mm-hmm.
And because when we unpick them and show them for what they are, which is myths and fallacies, perpetuated at a time when, say, women have very few freedoms of their own, very few rights of their own to their own personhood. We can show them for what they are, then they lose their power. And one of the most fundamental myths, I think, that still we need to unpick is that a condition of being a woman is to be in pain. And that affects how women's pain is received when they go to the doctor's office to report experiencing pain, whether that's acute or chronic. We can see that in the way women's pain is dismissed also in emergency room settings, and often with catastrophic and tragic results. We can see how prevalent these myths are also at an intersectional level, because where it comes to our narratives and our stories about women's pain, not all women in those stories are created equal. So, for example, throughout so much of history, white, middle class, upper class women were considered refined enough and civilized enough, again, heavy quotes around those words, to experience physical pain, whereas women of the working women of the so-called working classes, and especially non-white women, were seen as somehow existing lower down on this pain scale and having, the capacity to bear pain that meant their pain could be overlooked and disregarded in a way that white women's pain wasn't. And in the start of the book and the introduction to Unwell Women, I talk about how, as a white woman myself, I risk going to my doctor's office and being accused of being essentially hysterical. For a Black woman to go into the doctor's office and say she's in pain, she also faces this bias that she's not capable of feeling that pain. And that was really something, as we know, that came from awful, now largely debunked, pseudoscientific ideas about the capacity of Black people to feel pain that were perpetuated as justifications for the abuses of chattel slavery. We know those falsehoods for what they are. But again, these myths have incredible sticking power, and they present themselves as biases, often at an unconscious level. So I think this question of women in pain always has to come with, which women are we talking about and what kind of pain is she in?
And I suppose this sort of goes hand in hand, or not necessarily, but I feel like there's a natural connection there to something that I knew nothing about, which was this horrifying treatment that was enacted upon Puerto Rican women in I want to say the 60s and the 70s.
Yes. So the story that I write about it's not a story, it's a historical event I write about in Unwell Women is to do with the early testing for the combined contraceptive pill. So that's the contraceptive pill that has progesterone and estrogen in it.
Right.
So the most commonly taken form of the pill. And when the pill was sort of undergoing its kind of early testing in the States, there were conversations about how this drug could be tested, how its efficacy could be tested. And in the US, where the pill was being developed, contraception at that time was still de facto illegal. Okay, so you have Comstock laws still in place. So how do you test a medicine that stops people getting pregnant in a country where such thing is effectively illegal? Well, you go to the occupied territory, you go to Puerto Rico, where contraception is not illegal because it's being used as a population control measure.
Mm-hmm.
So women in Puerto Rico were offered this sort of trial of the pill without being necessarily fully informed about what it was that they were taking, or, and this is really crucial, without being informed that they were participating in a clinical study. When women reported awful side effects, because of course the hormone rates in these, early versions were incredibly high.
Mm-hmm.
The symptoms that they were experiencing were dismissed in the finding literature as often as the, emotional, and again, quotes around this, emotional hyperactivity of Latin American women. And even when, there were deaths associated with taking this, they were still dismissed as having nothing to do with the actual medication that had been administered. And what is devastating about this so-called pill trial is that, women in Puerto Rico have been subjected to coerced or non-consensual forms of sterilization and long-term contraception for years. And to disregard the reproductive and bodily autonomy of people in the name what is effectively as eugenics. Let's call it what it is. It was a eugenic measure to control the population that was state supported, government supported in order to serve a white supremacist agenda, and a native born agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we look at something like the pill, of course, the introduction of the pill was an incredibly significant part of the 60s revolution in sexual freedom and body autonomy. But I think it's always really important to hold every part of that history in your hands when you think about it, by honoring the histories and making sure we don't stop telling the stories of people who are expressed and exploited in the creation of something like the pill. We can also honor the freedoms that it afforded some women while not forgetting, the truth of its history.
Right.
Things that have been done in the names of liberating women often have happened at the expense of the autonomy, freedom, and liberation of other women. This is extremely important in our history. And we have birth control activists, reproductive health activists like Margaret Sanger, for example.
Yes. What an ambiguous figure in history she is.
I mean, she opened birth control clinics in areas of New York in the early 20th century that gave information and birth control devices to poor women, to immigrant families. But on the other hand, she held ideas about who should be able to reproduce and how that cannot be ignored. And, one does not outdo the other. Things that have been done in the name of liberation for some women have involved huge suffering and sacrifice, unwittingly, unwillingly for others.
Yeah. And I have to say, I'm embarrassed by this, but I think that I only saw birth control as we are taught to see it in the US as young women, I believe, or as liberal young women anyway, as this sort of unadulterated good that has given us the power over our own bodies, which, true to some extent, but I didn't really know the other side of it until I read this book.
Well, I don't think you should be embarrassed about that at all, because I think that, it's true that it's a liberatory technology, birth control. It's absolutely true. And the problem that I always want to make sure when I talk about these histories is that it's about holding two truths together at once. I think reproductive justice, we've always got to remember, is not just the right to not get pregnant and not continue pregnancies. It's also the right to do that if you want to, and to do that safely and with support, which sadly is not a right that's granted to all of us.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that it's necessarily embarrassing to think of it as liberatory. I was embarrassed that I didn't know the other side of it. And I'm so glad that I do now. And I'm so grateful to your book for this. I want to give this book to everyone. I kind of felt like reading it, I was being handed an essential part of my own history that I never knew about. And it felt really good and also really horrifying at moments.
Well, that's an incredibly kind thing to say, and thank you. The horrifying aspect is something that, I'm very conscious of. And I wanted to make these histories really clear, but at the same time, it was really important to me that I was not writing a book that reveled gratuitously in women's pain. There were some aspects of the book that I remember writing and having to walk away for a while because the source material was so horrific. And I was always thinking, how do I communicate the horror of this without actually writing what I'm reading here? And when I talk about this specifically, I'm talking about James Marion Sims, who in the sort of early mid 19th century in Alabama, in a town called Montgomery in the state of Alabama, where 2/3 of the population were enslaved people. He was a gynecologist and physician who did work with plantation owners, and he would often treat, again, these inverted commas are going around everything at the moment, but treat women who were working on the plantations, who were enslaved on the plantations, often when they experienced obstetric injuries after pregnancy and birth. And while he, treated these women for the purposes of making them again useful to their slave owners, he also used them as experimental surgical material for devising treatments for gynecological and obstetric injuries and disorders that would then largely would benefit white patients, right? So James Marion Sims famously experimented on there are three enslaved women who are named, and that their names are Betsy, Lucy, and Anarcha. And there are others too. But he also bought enslaved women to use as nurses in his practice that he rather grandiosely referred to as the first women's hospital in the United States. And what was so shocking about this was not only the descriptions of the pain and the screams and suffering of these women in his posthumously published autobiography, but it was also his extreme sense of righteousness in what he was doing. The sense that what he was doing was only for the good. And the reason he was justified in this kind of expression of his practice was because of those ideas we were talking about earlier around scientific racism, around the capacity of Black women to feel pain, and around their humanness, the debate around their very humanness, their very humanity, that is so difficult to even think about now. But it's a very stark reminder of how we must never forget the bodies of the people, the suffering of the people who really lie at the heart of the creation of this knowledge.
Having studied far in recent history of women's medical treatment, I imagine you know both so much and too much. And how does knowing what you know change how you interface with the medical system?
This is a great question. In my impetus for writing Unwell Women also came from my own experience as an unwell woman and navigating the medical system as a person with an underlying health condition that I didn't understand, and a lot of symptoms that were being dismissed when I went to see my doctor as, the symptoms of being a woman. Hormones, possible pregnancy, worrying too much, being oversensitive, the whole litany, the full litany of, oh, you're just a woman, please leave and let me get on with my job. So when I was finally diagnosed as having an autoimmune disease called lupus, systemic lupus erythematosus, to give it its full name, I'd experienced about about a little less than that, about 8 years of being told that I was a hysteric, essentially. But it wasn't until I was pregnant and my unborn child, my son, had an in utero cardiac condition. And one of the only causes of this condition are the antibodies that cause lupus in the mother. So I was blood tested for that in an afternoon and shown that I had it. So
Wow.
again, so I had two things coming up. One, that my pain was dismissed. Pain and other symptoms were dismissed because I was a woman, a young woman. And secondly, that I only became valuable in the eyes of the medical system once I was reproductive, once I was pregnant. And I'm
Wow.
extremely grateful now that I have so much knowledge around my own disease, but also around what it means to live in my own body, that I feel like I have the privilege of being able to articulate what's happening to me. But also from writing on Well Women, this has made me realize that in and of itself is a privilege, right? I am able to go to a doctor's office and explain how my pain feels, explain how I've been feeling, talk about what's happening in my body, and to a greater or lesser extent, advocate for myself. And I'm always very against the idea that women and marginalized people have to do all the advocacy on their own when they are trying to negotiate broken systems. The idea of being a kind of, going in and demanding to be taken seriously, that's not something that's available to all of us. And it's too much sort of pressure on the individual to change a system that needs to be changed at far higher levels than the individual. That's not her fault, and it shouldn't. Good care, good health, good care shouldn't be the privilege of only of those who are able to do advocating for themselves, is how I feel.
With your vast knowledge of women's medical history and understanding how we got to where we are today, you know so much more. You have so much more of that knowledge than so many of us will ever have when we walk into a doctor's office. What do you want women to know?
At the heart, I think it comes down to don't stop speaking up in whatever way you can. As a woman, as a marginalized person, as a person marginalized by a system of power like medicine, don't stop. Don't stop speaking up, and believe that your body is your own. Or remember, your body's your own.
Beautiful. Elinor, I thank you so much for speaking with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. It was such a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your thoughtful approach to everything. So thank you.
Welcome to the Bookend, where we end with books.
Indeed. Here we are.
We're here.
Ending with books.
Yeah. Elinor Cleghorn. That was really, really, really interesting.
Glad you thought so.
Where do you want to start? I mean, when you got Elinor onto the show, what were you thinking we were going to get out of this interview?
What was I thinking we were going to get out of this interview? I think what I wanted her to be able to transmit in a clear, simple, believable way is this, what I consider to be the truth, that women's bodies have done so much work for medicine in general over the years and yet have been viciously mistreated and sort of cast aside. It's interesting to think about how something that has been so important to the medical field in general has also been just discredited and not cared for. And when I say the medical field, I guess I'm also thinking about culturally, women's bodies have been so important. I mean, what would your life have been like if birth control didn't exist?
Why? Why do you ask?
I'm just thinking about like being a teenager in the US and, you get on birth control, you just do. And it's a way to keep like suburban kids, quote unquote, safe, and let them have a future. But we don't think about the costs of what that research to even develop this pill was. And for me, I think that's what I really wanted to get out of this interview. I wanted for people to have a new window in to how, I think what Elinor says is this knowledge exists because real women suffered. To think about the fact that all of the comfort, the pain relief, the advanced medical technology, the fact that I am sitting here with a fake hip in my body, all of that stuff exists because real people in the past went through some really tough, uncomfortable, life-ending sometimes stuff. We get to live now. We get to be comfortable now because all of this stuff happened in our past. And I think that often these stories are glossed over or we just never even hear them. So I was so shocked, and you can probably hear it in my voice in the interview, that these are things that I had absolutely no access to in any of the history classes I took, and certainly in none of the medical or health classes I took. Of course, I have like a liberal arts education. I wasn't specifically studying this stuff, but it was amazing to me, everything I didn't know. And it's made me think a lot more about every time I go to the doctor or every time I get a prescription filled, where did this come from?
Yeah, I thought it was a really good question you asked when you asked how it affects her, Elinor's relationship or interaction with the medical system. And yeah, I mean, it's almost like we should include in this episode some kind of prayer for the ancestors or something.
Yeah.
You know, remember, I think Elinor says, never forget the bodies of the people who suffered so that we could have this knowledge. And I think it's a really good question that you asked her about how her work has affected Elinor's own interaction and relationship with the medical system. I thought that was really good. Mm. And when she says she felt like she only became valuable to the medical system once she became reproductive, namely pregnant. Oh my
God, yes.
That was really interesting. I mean, as you know, I'm expecting my second child in the next couple of weeks.
Yes.
And it's definitely changed when my partner's, you know, it does change the feeling of a woman in society when you are on the bus together and she's pregnant.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Suddenly you do have a different kind of relationship to the world around you. Mm-hmm. But that's very complicated. Like, that's pretty hard to unpack. You obviously have a different relationship with the medical system at that point.
Yeah.
Like, all of a sudden you do get calls back in a different way. You do suddenly pay attention also to the fine print on certain medications. Yeah. So there is something that changes when a woman sort of becomes part of the multiplication.
Continuation of the race.
The value creation, part of the value creation chain.
Yeah. Part of the value creation chain of the capitalist society in which we live. Yes. No, I think what you're saying is really interesting. I think that what you're saying is also really valid. And it's that a woman is looked upon differently in society and by her doctors as soon as she is with child, because she's responsible for something that is now bigger than herself.
But also by people on the bus, not only the doctors.
I also said society.
Right, yes.
My question also is, though, like, why is she only valid as soon as she's pregnant? Why is she more valuable now all of a sudden?
Well, how about this? If somebody is a bit stinky, comes on the bus with a cane, how many people turn their back on this person? Whereas if like I think my partner's cute. If like a cute pregnant woman gets on the bus, how people sort of, oh, how can we help?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Oh, that answer's so easy for me. It's like a societal bias toward beauty, toward youth, toward future youth and production. It's it's all so obvious and also sad and like baked into the myths that have created us as a species. And I think that this conversation and Elinor's book is an opportunity to really think about that stuff a little bit more.
Yeah. Although, to be clear, it's good to take care of pregnant women.
Totally. Please do.
It's good to take care. I think the point is like where the violence behind the history of this care is something we shouldn't forget. And the fact that Elinor says she feels like, you know, she was having health issues that were not diagnosed for years and only became diagnosed when she's pregnant. That's how I got to this, right? So how do we take better care of each other, and especially women, beyond their own use to us in the world?
Right. How do we look at each other as humans who need our care and not as like tools to get to the next step? Yeah.
So you have any books about this you want to recommend?
On that friendly note.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. I have a very related book. This is actually from an author I really wanted to have on Simplify, who I reached out to. So, Kat Bohannon, if you're listening,
Holler.
Here's your chance to reply to my email. Kat Bohannon wrote this great book called Eve, How the Female Body Drove 200 Million Years of Human Evolution.
Cool.
It is cool. She's a science communicator, and her book looks at the science behind the development of the female sex, the idea of it, which is huge because scientific discovery has mostly focused on the male body, of course, as we've learned through Elinor's book as well. And it's what a reviewer might call sweeping. It covers how C-sections in the industrialized world are rearranging women's pelvic shape. It covers the similarities between pus and breast milk, all things I'm sure you're delighted to hear, considering your partner's expecting. And it'll change what you think you know about Homo sapiens. It's a really, really cool book, and I would really recommend picking up Eve, How the Female Body Drove 200 Million Years of Human Evolution.
Nice.
Yeah. You?
I mean, I had a couple fiction books. We're recording in the new Colo Media Studios here in Chapters Bookshop in Berlin.
I also almost shared fiction, but go ahead. Yeah.
And Sarah Collins was here for the opening night. She gave the intro to a talk with Jamaica Kincaid in the bookshop. And she wrote the book, The Confessions of Franny Langton, which was also made into a TV show. But this is an amazing book from the perspective of a former slave who's accused of murder and who also falls in love with, there's like a bit of a queer romance.
Oh, cool.
But she is, the one of the cruxes of the book is that Franny is a wager, basically, between two white men. The plantation owner, who's her first master, and a scientist in London. And the wager is sort of like, can this slave girl be taught intellect?
Wow.
Yeah, and she's experimented on also. But she's very smart, and she's very aware. And she's, the perspective of the book is sort of looking back. She's writing her confessions. And talks a lot about like, my body, a black body, a woman's body, has no value to them except as this wager. And yeah, it's a good book. And I was very impressed by Sarah Collins's short talk introduction in the bookshop, and she was very nice. So I recommend that. Yeah.
Well,
so novels. We almost never talk about novels.
No, but now we can.
Yeah.
We
I
couldn't
really
really
recommend those
before.
books. I really enjoyed those books.
Amazing. I love that we have that freedom now. We can recommend fiction.
We can recommend whatever
great
we want.
We can recommend whatever we want with great abandon. This is so exciting. Okay, great, Rex. Thank you.
Yeah. What should we tell people about when the next Simplifies are coming out?
You can expect a new Simplify every 2 weeks.
From now until forever.
From now until forever, if we have anything to say about it.
Till the sun explodes.
Yes,
Or books
until the
stop
sun
coming out.
explodes.
But even then we can do old books.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, thank you for coming back and listening with us. It was great to have you. And let's get out of here. Simplify was brought to you by me, Caitlin Schiller, you, Ben Schumann-Stoller, and special thanks to Audie Constantino, a longtime partner, co-conspirator of Simplify, who made this episode sound so good.
Yeah, I mean, we should say we're recording this in the new Colo Media Studios here in Berlin.
Here in Berlin, Germany. Come visit us.
We have a newsletter now. We will be passing around the links so that you can sign up, get some behind-the-scenes material, get some extra access, get some cool visuals and things that we can't do in audio only. Mm-hmm. So please sign up, keep an eye on what we're doing. And really, if you like this episode, just please pass it along. We're building independently, and word of mouth is the best thing that can help us grow.
Yes, thank you. Please also rate and review. It's been a while since we've asked for that, but yeah, it would help us out. So can't wait to be back with you. And till next time, check it out.
Check it out. Bye-bye.